ദുബായിൽ കാലാവസ്ഥാ ഉച്ചകോടി ക്ലൈമറ്റ് സമ്മിറ്റ് COP-28 സമാപിച്ചിരിക്കുകയാണ്. മുൻ വർഷങ്ങളിൽ നടന്നിട്ടുള്ള ക്ലൈമറ്റ് സമ്മിറ്റിനിൽ നിന്ന് വ്യത്യസ്തമായിട്ട് ഫോസിൽ ഫ്യൂവലിൻ്റെ ഉപയോഗം കുറച്ച് കൊണ്ടുവരണം എന്നുള്ള ഒരു ക്ലോസ് അതിനകത്ത് അതിൻ്റെ ഡ്രാഫ്റ്റിൽ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതിനെയും ഇപ്രാവശ്യത്തെ തീരുമാനങ്ങളെയും ചർച്ചകളെയും ഒക്കെ പലതരത്തിൽ ഇൻ്റർനാഷണൽ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ഏറ്റെടുത്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഭയങ്കര പോസിറ്റീവായിട്ട് കാണുന്നവരുണ്ട്, ക്രിറ്റിസിസംസ് ഉണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെ പലതരത്തിൽ പ്രാധാന്യമുള്ള ചരിത്ര പ്രാധാന്യമുള്ള ഒരു സമ്മിറ്റായിട്ട് തന്നെയാണ് ഈ COP-28 ഇപ്പോൾ വിശകലനം ചെയ്യപ്പെടുന്നത്. താങ്കളുടെ ഒരു കാഴ്ചയിൽ എന്തൊക്കെയാണ് മേജർ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ടേക്ക് അവേസ് ആയിട്ട് നമുക്ക് ഈ COP-28 പറയാൻ പറ്റുക?
Okay. 6 takeaways are according to me. First is that high emission industries, oil and gas, the industries, they were very influential in the whole process of deliberations, and they were very forceful in saying, this we agree to, this is doable, and this we cannot agree to, and so on. So I think that is very important for the whole climate conversation to be more broad based, because we have to accept it. Fossil fuels are here, and that industry has to play a very active role. That is number one. They address that issue, which is very good. Second thing is that
പക്ഷേ അതിനൊരു ടെർമിനോളജിയിൽ ഒരു ചെറിയ ഫേസിംഗ് ഔട്ട് ആണോ?
Phasing out is what a lot of people have been batting for, pushing for. But now we are talking to UAE and Saudi Arabia and all of these countries in the room. So they did not agree to phasing out.
Okay.
Paksha, they agreed to phasing down. So the fact that I think we should not forget that it's the first time that fossil fuel paranjittu or term is there in the declaration. But phasing out is not there. Phasing down only is there. Hopefully they will work on that going forward.
നേരത്തെയുള്ള സമ്മിറ്റുകളിലൊക്കെ എമിഷനെ കുറിച്ച് മാത്രമല്ലേ സംസാരിച്ചിരുന്നത്. ഇപ്രാവശ്യത്തെ ഒരു പ്രത്യേകത എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ ഓയിൽ കമ്പനീസിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഓയിൽ കമ്പനി ടൈക്കൂൺ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആൾ തന്നെയാണ് സുൽത്താൻ അൽ ജാബർ തന്നെയാണ് ഇതിൻ്റെ ഈ സമ്മിറ്റിൻ്റെ ചെയർമാനായിട്ട് വന്നിട്ടുള്ളത്. തുടക്കത്തിൽ അതൊരു കോൺട്രവേഴ്സിയും കൂടെ ആയിരുന്നു. എന്നിട്ടും ഈ ഫോസിൽ ഫ്യൂവൽ ഫേസിങ് ഔട്ട് എന്നുള്ളൊരു ടെർമിനോളജി ഇതിനകത്ത് ഉൾപ്പെടുത്താൻ പറ്റി എന്നുള്ളത് വേറെ തരത്തിൽ ഒരു
It is definitely a positive. Definitely a positive, because we mentioned fossil fuels and then we didn't get to phasing out, but we got to phasing down. So that I think is positive only.
അതെങ്ങനെയായിരിക്കും ഈ ഒരു ഉൾപ്പെടുത്തിയത് എങ്ങനെയായിരിക്കും ഭാവിയിൽ മറ്റു രാജ്യങ്ങളുടെ പോളിസികളെ നിർണ്ണയിക്കാൻ പോകുന്നത്, തീരുമാനിക്കാൻ പോകുന്നത്?
See, for example, every country now has to have a roadmap saying that, okay, scenarios we create. In these scenarios, if we are phasing it down by 2 so much percent by 2050, by 2070, whatever, or what is going to be the response of our economy? That has to be there. That creates the conditions where people can hold the policymakers in India or policymakers in Indonesia or different countries. They can hold them accountable for that. We had committed to this. You had said investments in these technologies. Where are the investments? So it allows for a little more precise conversations. For example, I'll give you an example. One of the things which came out in COP-28 is tripling of renewable energy capacity. Tripling. India didn't agree, China didn't agree. And China currently has the highest capacity in the world. So in a sense, what China is probably saying is that they don't see it as achievable for them to go from there to triple of that. Or they want to see other countries do a little bit more before they can go there. So I think it's going to directly affect renewables, because you're talking about fossil fuels and phasing it down. It is also going to affect things like biodiesel, which is important for a country like Indonesia.
Okay.
Right? Because it's not that biodiesel is a silver bullet. Biodiesel has its own problems with respect to deforestation and so on. So that way it is very, very, it's a very important, powerful step that is being announced in COP-28.
ഈ റിന്യൂവബിൾ എനർജി സോഴ്സസിന് ഇന്ത്യ പോലുള്ള ഒരു രാജ്യത്ത് ഏതൊക്കെ തരത്തിലാണ് എന്തൊക്കെ സോഴ്സസ് ആണ് നമുക്കിവിടെ ഏറ്റവും പ്രാക്ടിക്കലായിട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നത്?
പ്രാക്ടിക്കലായിട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നത് ആൻഡ് വാട്ട് ഇസ് ഡോമിനേറ്റിംഗ് എ ലോട്ട് ഇസ് സോളാർ. വി ഓൾസോ ആർ ടോക്കിംഗ് അബൌട്ട് വിൻഡ്. പക്ഷേ solar is the one that is very the potential is very high because a large amount of the land mass of India is inside the tropics.
Okay.
That translates to more thermal power being there, and now it's a question of whether you can kind of tap into it. There are issues like, do we have access to the battery technologies? Yes. Do we have access to technologies? Which comes into, I think, another issue which was debated, yes, as always, and even in this COP, that what are the countries that have the technologies doing for countries that don't have the technologies. For example, you take a country like Australia, they are very rich in lithium, which goes into all of their batteries and technologies. Yeah. So what are the kinds of commitments those countries are making? It becomes very important for. So as we would expect, most countries which have the technologies are not in the tropics. Most countries which are in the tropics don't have the technology. So in a sense, I think these two groups of countries, the tropical countries which tend to be the south or the economic south, and the temperate countries which tend to be the developed countries, how they will partner and who will help which country to kind of come up the technology. I think that becomes very important.
ഇന്ത്യയിൽ ഇപ്പോഴും കോൾ ആണല്ലോ ഇതിൻ്റെ ഒരു മേജർ എനർജി സോഴ്സ് ആയിട്ട് ഇപ്പോഴും ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. ചൈനയിലൊക്കെ അങ്ങനെ തന്നെയാണ് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. ഗ്ലോബൽ വാർമിങ്ങിനെ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു വലിയ എമൗണ്ട് കോൺട്രിബ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു കാര്യവും ഈ കോൾ എനർജി ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത് തന്നെയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിൽ നിന്നൊരു പെട്ടെന്നൊരു ഷിഫ്റ്റ് എന്നുള്ളത് എത്രത്തോളം പോസിബിൾ ആണ്? ഈ
പെട്ടെന്നൊരു ഷിഫ്റ്റ് പറഞ്ഞാൽ, സി റൈറ്റ് നൗ വി ആർ 1.4 ഡിഗ്രി സെൻറ്റിഗ്രേഡ് അബവ് pre-industrial levels as a planet, right? So that is, we are already Paris Agreement in 2015 envisaged or anticipated that we might reach 1.5 degrees plus by 2100.
Okay.
So we are still 75 years to go to that, and we have already gotten very close to it. So that is a very real concern. So how will coal work? We obviously cannot keep burning coal the way we are burning it now. It has to be. Will it be replaced in one shot? It will not be. Okay. So there is going to be a phasing down in that sense. So it is going to happen over time in stages, but it is something that has to happen. If you look at the 9 planetary boundaries which we are in danger of crossing, and why this concept of planetary boundaries is important is that it is important to maintain something called the Holocene. The Holocene is a relatively hospitable environment which has existed for human beings to flourish. Okay. It is not AC, Paksha, it is not too hot, it's not too cold. So it is a somewhat balanced environment. Now in these planetary boundaries, obviously carbon emission is a big problem because it will push us beyond that point of no return or it will push us beyond that. But novel chemicals which can get released through something like nuclear power can also push us beyond the point of no return. So these 9 planetary boundaries are working together in a very complex way.
Okay. എന്താണ് ഈ പ്ലാനറ്ററി ബൗണ്ടറീസ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ?
Okay. So the planetary boundaries are these. It is climate change, which is kind of the big outcome. Biodiversity is one. Okay. So we are looking at not more than 10 out of a million species going extinct in a year. That is the technical definition.
Okay. Each year,
10 and above it is happening. Okay. But we are saying not more than 10. We are not, or the climate science is not saying it has to be perfect. Nothing should go extinct. They are just saying that not more than 10. Right? So that is one. That is biodiversity aspect. Ocean acidification is a big problem because all the various chemicals that are there on land go into the rivers go into the sea, and eventually it acidifies the ocean. Depletion of the ozone layer, which is a big problem because that we all know about it as something that happens in Australia and causes skin cancer, but it has far-reaching effects in different parts of the world. We also have atmospheric aerosol, that is various gases getting into the atmosphere, and the way they interact with each other as well as how they affect our atmospheric layers is a big problem. We have biogeochemical flows of chemicals. Another big part which directly we see every day is freshwater use.
Okay.
How much fresh water do we have and how much fresh water do we use? Not just India, all over the world. For example, if you take Indonesia, it's the best place to grow palm oil or oil palm. But oil palm is a very water hungry crop. So they are using freshwater sources to somehow support the growth of that oil palm. So that is a big problem. So do we have enough for all people to consume? That is very closely related to land system change. So what proportion of land was forest, what proportion was inhabited places, what proportion was water, what proportion was roads, all of that is drastically changing.
Okay.
What proportion is mangrove swamps, all of it is changing. Again, my favorite example these days is Indonesia. So there they refer to it as peatland, these wetlands and peatlands. So they're very carbon rich places, and that is the place that they prefer to convert into the oil palm plantations, creating a lot of problems. And finally, of course, the ninth planetary boundary is novel chemicals getting released into the Earth system. Some of which we have some experience as to what might happen, some of which every time it happens we learn something and there is some crisis, so on. So we're really talking about each of these planetary boundaries, and starting from 2009, Rockstorm et al. And their team, part of this thing called the Stockholm Resilience Center, they are the ones who conceptualize this. So a lot of this science is being developed, and as it reaches a certain level of empirical validity, it gets into the policy of various entities. That's kind of how it works. So I'm just living in, or I'm just referring to that world. And then there are what we discussed or what we often talk about, those who say all of this is bogus. That's a separate story. Right? So these are the planetary boundaries. I'll just repeat it once.
Okay.
Climate change. Basically, in climate change, we're talking of the Earth becoming extreme in terms of temperature. Places that never saw 50 degrees centigrade have 50 degrees centigrade for a long time. Unseasonal monsoon and unseasonal storms and all of that which is happening. Elongated dry spells which is happening in Australia and the US, leading to forest fires and all of that. So climate change. Biodiversity loss, which is a big concern, especially in the equatorial belt where biodiversity is very rich, and we are in the tropics where it is rich. Ocean acidification. The fourth one is depletion of the ozone layer. Fifth is the aerosol pollution again in the atmosphere, right? Then we have the biogeochemical flows of NPK, nitrogen and phosphorus. Then the third last one, and the last three ones are kind of important because these are in the news very often. Is freshwater use, land use system, and how land use system changes, and finally the release of novel entities into the atmosphere. So these are the kind of 9 planetary boundaries, and it's very well quantified and so on, and say that okay, when it comes to biodiversity, you can't lose more than so many species. It's all quantified in that sense. And what is the idea? The idea is that because the Earth is a complex system, we cannot fully anticipate what will happen if we cross those boundaries.
Okay.
The reference point is what we call the Holocene. Holocene is where we have existed for the last thousands of years. It's been good to human beings, and we have flourished and crowded and outcrowded and all that. To maintain Earth like that, then these 9 planetary boundaries is what it is. The other thing is the CO2 emissions. That is that, remember I said emissions, sequestration, vulnerability, resilience. Emissions part, we talk about it in companies as comprising of 3 scopes: scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 is emissions which come from company owned assets. Okay, within the premises of the company. Nammaloda factory, avadana vara smoke, those kinds of emissions. Scope 2 is largely electricity. So if I am plugged into the Kerala State Electricity Board, where does Kerala State Electricity Board get its power from?
Okay.
And other emissions etraya. So the emissions are actually happening avada, where it is getting generated. But that is another thing that we account for, scope 2. And scope 3 is all the emissions that is happening in my entire value chain of my company. For example, Apple, 99% of its emissions happen in its value chain. It doesn't happen inside its company. Inside the company, they are carbon negative. Right? But then they send things to China, some things get made, and then that gets transported to some other markets and sold there. So that's all scope 3 stuff. Scope 3 is the value. I think it's useful to think about that for all kinds of things, even if you're, even as an institute or as a school or college. What is scope 1? What is scope 2, scope 3? What is the relative size of these emissions? You will have, depending upon your activity, a lot of your emissions may be in one of these different scopes that you don't even know about. Our campus, for example, one emission source is people fly in and fly out, students during vacations. So that is not anything to do with us, but we have a role in the way. So that is all scope.
അടുത്തത് ലോസ് ആൻഡ് ഡാമേജ് ഫണ്ടിന്റെ ഒരു അഗ്രിമെന്റിൽ വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്.
Okay. The loss and damage fund is $700 million, which by itself looks like a large sum of money. Paksha, we should remember that in earlier COPs, they have estimated climate-related damage could be as much as $400 billion. So, then it's just a small part of that. Out of that 700, so there is a much larger estimated damage. 700 million is being put forward as the L&D loss and damage fund, and countries are contributing to that fund. I was recently seeing that US contributed $17.5 million to that fund, which seems to be small. It should be more. But then it's not just US. There are countries that are batting above their kind of UAE, the host of COP-28, contributed 100 million. Germany, 100 million. So there are countries that are contributing more or less depending upon how they perceive their role in this entire. Okay. The other important thing is that, which when we talk of L&D fund, I think we have to dig down and get what does it cover and what it does not cover. It only covers damages. The name of the fund is a very telling name: loss and damage. Something bad happens, we'll kind of open our wallets. It is not, in that sense, it is actually only dealing, it is a reactive fund. It is not a fund that is going to support somebody who says that I want to do something to prevent that, or I want to do something to increase society's resilience towards that kind of damage. That will not be covered by the L&D fund. So if you go today and say that Kerala, we want to spend so much of money so that if it floods again like it flooded in 2018, our response will be much better, or our we will be in a much more, it will not cover that. It will only cover loss and damage.
Oh.
Now, this is something which is problematic for the developing countries and low income countries for sure. Because, see, the way I think about a lot of what goes on in climate is 4 things. One, 2 things are very operational and here and now. One is emissions and sequestration. Emissions is how much is going out, which we should prevent. And sequestration is how much we are absorbing, how much our forests in Amazon or in Congo or in Indonesia are absorbing. And hence deforestation reduces their capacity to absorb. So that these 2 things are the very operational. And then slightly more strategic is vulnerabilities and resilience. So in vulnerabilities, we are thinking of, okay, how is my society how is it going to get damaged? How can I make my societies and my earth a little more resilient to some of these damages? That is a slightly longer term planning parameter. For example, I was in Chennai recently, and then Chennai suffered from floods again. But then I was in a part of Chennai where this Adayar river flows. And one of the things which I noticed is it's a lot better than what it used to be 25 years back.
Okay.
Now, it is saddening for me that something bad has to happen before they do that. But then I spoke to a few people and they were saying that a lot of interventions have been done on the Adayar. Not just where it meets the sea, that is a part which is inside the city of Chennai, but also upstream where it originates. So those are the actions where you're dealing with vulnerabilities and you're building resilience. And the L&D fund will not support those things.
Okay.
So poor countries and countries like India, we are saying that, boss, we need money to invest in those kinds of projects. We want to be not reactive, we want to be kind of ahead of the game, right? That is something important for us to understand about the L&D fund. The thing which countries are debating a lot is this stuff.
Okay.
Also, a lot of this L&D money will eventually go to the low-lying island nations. But the island nations are not happy with it either.
Okay.
They are saying, like, boss, be much harder on core climate change issues. Ocean acidification is a big issue.
അത് സെപ്പറേറ്റ് ആയിട്ട് തന്നെ പരിഗണിക്കേണ്ട ഒരു വിഷയം കൂടിയാണ് ഐലൻഡ് കൺട്രീസിന്റെ അല്ലേ?
പിന്നെ അവർക്ക് be it icebergs or melting or
directly
land will go. So it is one thing when countries like India, where some parts of our country also will get damaged, but when that is the country only, Maldives, so obviously they have much more to lose. So they tend to take a certain position which in the COP negotiations, which is useful, which is I think important. Otherwise we'll kind of not take those aspects very seriously. Then we have we spoke about the L&D fund. Then countries also pledge to invest in carbon reducing or carbon reduction technologies.
Okay.
Or what is called in industry as decarbonization. So can we get more better solutions to do the things that we're doing so that our emissions is much lower, right? And that is a space in which a lot of companies are active, also because it reduces costs, and if you are able to take out a significant cost from your manufacturing or whatever, it can obviously affects you in a positive way as a company. So there are lots of ambitious pledges. The world is already on track to meet the renewable energy expansion goal by 2030. Okay, right now it is growing at about 15 to 17% every year. We are having more and more renewable capacity. So
means
our renewable capacity is growing at a fair clip. Paksha, is it fast enough?
Okay.
And how
this is not enough. This space is not enough.
The space is not in. We need to go faster.
Okay.
If you want to. So that is. Then we also have carbon capture and storage technologies, in which again a lot of commitments have been made to invest in those technologies and to also have some amount of information and know-how sharing across. Right? We spoke about the L&T fund. The other thing also is that it's not only carbon. See, actually, it is carbon equivalent. Emissions are measured in carbon equivalent.
Okay.
And often this leads to people thinking it is about carbon only. But then there are also emissions which are like methane emissions. Mm-hmm. Now, methane emissions are 80 times more impactful, negatively impactful of our earth than carbon. So, cherry amount poyalum, it's a big problem.
Okay.
So, there are lots of, now there is a focus that, okay, let's not talk only carbon, but let's look at, specific types of emission and deal with it.
Okay.
So, methane emissions is one of them. US officials, for example, announced the federal government would require fossil fuel companies to detect and fix methane leaks that waft through their production facilities. It's a big deal, right? So, fossil fuel companies have various production systems in which there are methane leaks. So, we are not only worried about the fossil fuel itself of it, although we are having commitments to kind of reduce it and so on, fossil fuel emissions, but then the way that fossil fuel is reaching the market should not have methane leakages that happen. And then a lot of the companies are committing to it. Almost 100 oil and gas companies have committed to it. ExxonMobil, ADNOC, which is the UAE company. So a lot of them have committed to that, saying that yes, we will fix that. It is also kind of taking out costs for them. And
could you explain what is the 1.5 degree pre-industrial?
Right. The reference point is that the Holocene is basically a fairly nice climatic condition for human beings, which has existed for a long time. Now, pre-industrial levels, when we talk about it, we are talking about 1750. Whatever was the global temperature around that time. Now, if it increases by 1.5 degrees, the science says that we are okay, we'll deal with it. It will have various complex influences on various things, but then it seems to be fine. We could manage it. So, that is what we are saying as 1.5. Okay. What happens if it goes beyond 1.5? Is that we don't know.
Okay.
Okay, but it could lead to deleterious, or it could lead to negative effects, is what people are saying. Okay, some of these negative effects could be more extreme weather, for example. There could be others as well, but that remains to be seen. That is why that 1.5 becomes a very important reference point in COP negotiations.
Okay,
right? Where are we now? 2026, we are at 1.4.
1.4. Okay.
Now in Paris, we said that.
ഇതിൽ ഈ 1.4ലേക്ക് നമ്മൾ എത്തിയത് ലാസ്റ്റ് ഇൻഡസ്ട്രിയൽ റവല്യൂഷന് ശേഷമുള്ള ഈ പീരീഡിലാണ്.
Yes. And ഈ പീരീഡിലാണ് since industrial revolution, and although from 2015 COPs from Paris and so on, people have been talking about it.
Okay.
It is still kind of going unabated. Our growth is happening at the level, right?
അതങ്ങനെ നിൽക്കുകയല്ല. It's growing up.
Yes. 1.4 is where we have from pre-industrial levels. What does that mean? That means that the target, or not target, the estimate that they had in Paris, that we will reach 1.5 by 2100.
Okay.
We will reach it much earlier. We will reach it by 2030 itself, or 2026 or 2027. We will reach it. So now it's a question of, are we going to wait for those planetary boundaries to, because it is a complex system, it's very difficult to point out to what will happen first leading to what and so on. Something small might happen, but that might be the, last nail in the coffin or something. It's a bad analogy, but yeah. So it's more safety kind of a thing, that inside the planetary boundaries we are relatively safer. But then there is some good news also. The good news is that in Paris, they said we are going to reach 4.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial revolution, 4.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial times temperature by 2100. Okay? But today, we have revised those estimates and we are saying that, with all the things that we are trying to do and everything that is happening, it won't be plus 4.5 degrees centigrade, it will be plus 3 degrees centigrade.
Okay.
Now, it is good news in that context, but it may or may not be enough. So, that's kind of where we are. So, and it is also science that is kind of, as we get more and more empirical evidence that supports it, things get added and so on. So, it's pretty dynamic in that sense.
ക്ലീൻ എനർജി ആയിട്ട് നമ്മളിപ്പോഴും അറ്റോമിക് എനർജീനെ പറയാറുണ്ട്. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു സാധ്യതയും കൂടെ ഇന്ത്യ മാത്രമല്ല ലോകം മുഴുവൻ പുതിയ അറ്റോമിക് പ്ലാന്റ്സ് ഒന്നും വികസിത രാഷ്ട്രങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നില്ല. പക്ഷെ ഇന്ത്യ പോലുള്ള കൺട്രീസിൽ ഇപ്പോഴും അതിനെതിരായ സമരങ്ങൾ നടത്തുന്നു, അത്തരം ഇംപ്ലിമെൻറ്റേഷനുള്ള ശ്രമങ്ങളും നടക്കുകയൊക്കെ ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. അത് എത്രത്തോളം സേഫാണ്, എത്രത്തോളം അതിനെ നമുക്ക് ഈ യഥാർത്ഥ അർത്ഥത്തിൽ ക്ലീൻ എനർജി എന്നുള്ള കാറ്റഗറിയിൽ പെടുത്തുന്നു?
If you put a very emissions only lens, then it looks clean.
Yeah.
But there is also radioactive waste. And once you have radioactive waste, how are you going to deal with it? Where is it going to be stored away, or where is it going to be, hopefully it won't be disposed, it will be stored away somewhere. And do we have the technologies and the processes to do that in a responsible way that can be accounted for?
Yeah.
That is one. Also, I think non-proliferation, that can, what is technologies that countries which need it might get is difficult for us to understand. But it's it is also capital intensive. So all of those are the potential challenges with nuclear. But then nuclear also has this huge potential to say that, okay, all of these are there. But if we can deal with them, then will it help us to pull us up in a sense, right? For example, we are a poor or developing country, and then we want power. So if people will not work for all 24 hours in a day, or will not be able to study when they have exams, it obviously has a problem from a development perspective, right? So that is there. So I think these are both parts of the solution, is how I would like to look at it. It is that some of the big energy, or the large amounts of energy that you want to put into the grid, some of that might come from nuclear, it might not. Whereas solar is going to be a very distributed solar, or solar especially, rooftop solar and things like that is going to be very distributed solutions.
പോപ്പുലേഷൻ കൂടിക്കൊണ്ടേ ഇരിക്കുക തന്നെയാണ്. ടെക്നോളജിയും അതിനനുസരിച്ച് പലതരത്തിൽ മാറ്റങ്ങൾ സംഭവിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു വാദം എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, ഒരു ആർഗ്യുമെൻ്റ് എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, ടെക്നോളജി ഇതിനെല്ലാം പരിഹരിക്കും. അങ്ങനെ ഭയങ്കര ഒപ്റ്റിമിസ്റ്റിക് ആയിട്ട് ഈ ക്ലൈമറ്റ് ചേഞ്ചിനെ പോലും കാണുന്ന ആളുകളുണ്ട്.
Technology will solve all problems.
Yes.
Okay. So if you take my industry, we are in the education industry, and then we teach students. When COVID happened, we went entirely into online mode.
Yeah.
And we still took classes, they still submitted assignments, everything still happened. Now, the pro-technology view is that everything still happened. The slightly more critical view is that yes, everything still happened, but once COVID was over, we still got back to the old pen and pencil, that kind of working. I think today it's a little tricky to think about how technology influences the world because of the sheer amount of dollars that are behind technologies, right? Any successful technology is venture backed, it is backed by dollars for marketing and so on, that at a certain point of time I find it difficult to understand what is it that the business is saying and what it is the marketing team is saying. So that is a little tricky. I want to give one example. There's a chain of schools called Waldorf schools, headquartered in Silicon Valley, right? What is the USP? The USP is that there's no technology in our schools. It is all old chalk, board, pen, pencil, and then there are lots of takers for these schools. And I already kind of gave out the answer when I said it's in Silicon Valley, but most of the kids that go there are the children of the top honchos of the technology giants, right? Angana or idund that, you know, we will sell this, but we will buy something else for our children. When you come to, let's say, climate change, a little closer to climate change, and then look at companies like ExxonMobil and so on, they are investing a lot, ADNOC and so on. They are investing a lot in the technologies to prevent methane from leaking, because they also realize that that is good business for them to, you know, to do. So there's technology is part of the answer. I would like to think it is. I work a lot these days as a researcher using various technologies, digital technologies, which help us see the world in a certain light that we could not see even 15 years back, right? So if you look at remote sensing and remote sensing data and information, the way we see it and we can visualize it now is totally different, much better, because of the advances that technology has done. But then we have to also be a little critical about it, and what are negative outcomes and what are the problems it doesn't fix. For example, biodiesel is great. Doesn't depend on fossil fuels, but it still is associated tightly to deforestation. Okay. So adu nammal ithri or nuanced aayittu or world view is, I think, the need of the hour.
And solar energy same problem is existing.
Yes. So solar energy is there. It will not spew out smoke like your coal factories will spew out, but then other rare earth metals which go into those panels or whatever, who's mining that in Africa or some part of the world? It's not a silver bullet. And hence those environmental impact assessments, they become important.
Yes.
They become important, but unfortunately I think they are also seen sometimes as slowing things down, in quotes. And so we have some policies which are bypass or right size or right time or whatever. But I think it's an important, it is a very important field it's a very interdisciplinary field. So technologists will say some things, ecologists will say something else, politicians will say something, religious people will say something. So conversation has to be had, especially in India, where things might move slowly, but it has to be participative. So otherwise it's not going to be long lasting enough.
നമ്മൾ നേരത്തെ പോപ്പുലേഷനെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ. അപ്പോൾ അതിൽ അർബൻ പോപ്പുലേഷനാണ് കൂടുതൽ. അതിനകത്തൊരു കണക്ക് നോക്കുകയാണെന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ഈ അർബൻ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ്റെ 75% ആണ് ഈ എനർജി കൺസ്യൂം ചെയ്യുന്നത്. 75% ഓഫ് എനർജി ടോട്ടൽ കൺസ്യൂം ചെയ്യുന്നത് അർബൻ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ. ഇതിൻ്റെ അകത്തൊരു വൈരുദ്ധ്യം നിലനിൽക്കുന്നില്ലേ?
See, one thing is the vulnerable population, right, really has unfortunately no voice, or their voice is often marginalized and so on. Are they the ones creating the trouble? No. I mean, they're probably not even participating in it. Lot of our development, our development or the nature of that development has costs that are not counted, right? Because they are externalized. You say that, okay, those are some external costs, and then different people will come to peace with it in different ways. Some people will say we paid our taxes. Some people will say that might be not great, but it's according to the law. We are able to put it aside. പക്ഷേ especially you go to cities and you see people who are actually suffering from flooding that happens. They are not rich people, they are most of the time poor people, and they live in the live in the lower lying areas, and they are the places that get flooded. They are the ones who are also exposed to a lot of the quality of air in our cities. I fell sick last week, went to Chennai, went around for 2 days, and then second day, end of day, I was out. That is simply because the amount of yes, there are lots of people sitting there in an AC car, and yes, they are losing time. But their health at least is somewhat safeguarded compared to somebody who's in a bus or riding a bike or in an auto or whatever. Although riding a bike and riding an auto means they are not that poor. So I'll stick with bus.
Okay.
Bus is difficult. They are not contributing to it, but they are paying for it. Also their kind of their avenues to development. For poor countries, we talk in terms of, in this context of climate, we talk of low carbon development pathways. So if you kind of think of what is the development pathway for somebody who's trying to break through that, let's say, lower income strata to a better place, right? You have to have access to education, you have to have all of those things. And if you are all the time falling sick, obviously it's a huge problem. You're falling sick for which nobody will pay, right? They won't. You're not insured for sure. So,
ഇതിൽ COP-28 ഡിസ്കഷൻ പോയിന്റ് ആയിട്ട് വന്ന വേറൊരു വലിയ വിഷയം വേസ്റ്റ് മാനേജ്മെന്റ് ആയിരുന്നു. നമുക്ക് ഇപ്പോഴും നമ്മൾ കേരളത്തിലാണെങ്കിൽ ഇത്രയധികം എല്ലാ പാരാമീറ്റേഴ്സിലും മുകളിൽ നിൽക്കുന്നു എന്ന് അവകാശപ്പെടുന്ന കേരളത്തിൽ പോലും ഒരു പ്രോപ്പറായിട്ടുള്ള വേസ്റ്റ് മാനേജ്മെൻറ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം ഇംപ്ലിമെൻ്റ് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് പറ്റിയിട്ടില്ല. പക്ഷേ അതിൻ്റെ ശ്രമങ്ങൾ വലുതായിട്ട് നടക്കുന്നൊക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. ബ്രഹ്മപുരം ഈ അടുത്ത കാലത്തുണ്ടായ വലിയൊരു ഉദാഹരണമാണ്. ഈ ആഗോളതലത്തിൽ തന്നെ ഇൻ്റർനാഷണലി എങ്ങനെയാണ് വേസ്റ്റ് മാനേജ്മെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ രീതികളൊക്കെ നടന്നു പോകുന്നത്? ഇതിനകത്ത് നടന്ന ചർച്ച എങ്ങനെയാണ് അതിനെ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത്?
So again, waste, this is again a place where governments all over the world has to have a big role to play.
Political decisions are ഇവിടെ പ്രധാനം.
So, just like what you said, even in Kerala, even Calicut, 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. if you drive in Calicut, you will see a lot of burning piles of rubbish. And a lot of that has plastic in it and paper in it and so on. We have certain ways of getting around it, but the point is those things shouldn't get burnt. They should be going to some proper waste landfill system or waste management system. One of my colleagues who went for some work to Japan was saying that the last day that they were coming back from Japan, the whole day went in segregating their waste and putting them into the waste baskets in their hotel. And it took a long time. And I was saying, why should it take such a long time? They said there are 21 categories of waste. So in Japan, if you don't categorize it into those 21 groups before you put it inside, you will not be able to throw it out.
Okay.
So that is the level at which the world is, or certain parts of the world are operating.
നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടെ വെറും രണ്ട്
കാറ്റഗറി വെറ്റ്, ഡ്രൈ, ഗ്രീൻ, യെല്ലോ,
അതുപോലൊന്നും പ്രോപ്പറായിട്ട് നടക്കുന്നില്ല.
So there is a lot of things to do. For a country like us, I think it is important. നിങ്ങൾ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ we are not able to do it even with 2 or 3 categories. But yes, that has to be done, that has to get implemented. If you go to Kudumbashree and all of that, and if they come to pick up your waste, they will not touch it if you don't do a good job segregating it at source. Maybe that is part of the answer. Maybe they have an opportunity that even they themselves don't realize it, that
individual level തന്നെ അതൊരു മാറ്റം വരേണ്ടതാണ്.
അത് വരണം. പക്ഷെ ആ മാറ്റം where will it come from? Who will invest in it? Who will push it? Right? That I think is important. Government has to have a very, very important role to play. It's also a place where a lot of the social equity issues stare you in the face, because where are these waste yards next to what kind of places or so on. So that's another. I think in Cochin recently there was that fire.
No, that is Brahmapuram.
Brahmapuram, yeah, which is very sad. It's a very bustling city and so on, and then yet all of this also does happen. Waste is so there is all. So this applies to everybody, because this relates a lot to over 50-60 years of a very consumerist growth that we've had all across the world. Maybe when I was in school, maybe it was not so consumer oriented. We still went to ration shops and things like that. But the difference between the ration shop and a supermarket is that in the ration shop, the queue was to enter it, and in the supermarket, it is to leave the supermarket. Okay. Either way, there's a queue. But the point, what I was trying to say is that this consumer-led growth that we have also generates waste like anything.
Okay.
So you have everything comes packaged. Everybody has 3 or 4 soaps, all of that. So we generate that waste, and how much are we as consumers looking at? Is it coming in a box that is easier to recycle, or we don't know. We have to ask ourselves that question. One of our students in the institute is working on something, or has just submitted his thesis on conscious consumerism. I think that is a part of the story. I think we have to be much more conscious of where we are going with these things, because it's one thing to say we will segregate it at source, but sometimes the source may be even more cerebral. Do we need 6 different types of soaps, for instance? I'm just saying it. So that is an important thing. There are examples of companies that have stopped carrying certain lines of clothing because they felt that this is creating too much of environmental damage. So there's a company called Patagonia, Western company and all that, but they just said that, boss, if I carry this jacket in red color, then I will create too much of pollution, and I don't want to do that. So it comes down to a simple choice, and the person says, okay, no red jackets for that type of jacket. And as far as the market accepts it, it's okay. If the market says, no, I want that red, I will go to your competitor and buy it from the competitor, then we have lost. But consumers need to demand for those kinds of choices also.
നമ്മൾ എൻവയൺമെൻറ്റിനെ പറ്റി സംസാരിക്കുമ്പോൾ ഒക്കെ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വാക്കാണ് സസ്റ്റൈനബിലിറ്റി. അതൊരു ഭയങ്കര ആഴമുള്ള ഭയങ്കര അർത്ഥമുള്ള വാക്കാണ്. How can you define or
see what we look, one is sustainability and all the climate and pollution type of arguments, which is more, is my planet healthy? The other is social sustainability. Okay, all of this 9 planetary boundaries, we have to remain within that to ensure that the earth continues with us on it. The social boundaries are also there, right? The social boundaries come down to things like, do I have livelihood, do I have a decent amount of health, do I have access to education, the social development goals of the United Nations. So do I have all of those things? Because that is required for people to just live in a fair manner, right? So obviously something that is, let's say, so it segues into the other question you asked about technology, right? So when you say a lot of technology solutions, they may be okay from a planetary perspective, but if they are not okay from a social perspective, that is, if they are too costly, or they don't generate jobs, things like that, or they lead to job loss, then that's another problem of a different nature. And most sustainability researchers, and in my colleagues, some of them are sustainability researchers and they teach subjects on sustainability. For them, climate is one part of sustainability. They will say, okay, all of these things, in addition to that, also we'll have to think of how this will work in the earth around us socially. Is it fair for all communities? That. So for them, sustainability is a much larger umbrella inside which climate is one part, and then sustainability has a strong social aspect to it. And obviously we are in a B school, so there's always economic or profitability angle to it as well. There are also people who look at, is my business sustainable from an economic perspective? But that I think is kind of, that's what a lot of the business theory anyway takes care of. So anyway addresses.
കേരളത്തിലിരുന്നിട്ട് ആലോചിക്കുമ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ വെസ്റ്റേൺ ഗാർഡ്സ് അത്രയും ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ആണെന്ന് നമുക്കറിയാം. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ബയോഡൈവേഴ്സിറ്റി, അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു കിടപ്പ്, അത് ഭയങ്കര യുണീക്കാണ് യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ. പക്ഷേ നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടുത്തെ ഒരു പലതരത്തിലുള്ള ഇതിൻ്റെ നശീകരണം നടക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. നമ്മളതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് സംസാരിക്കുമ്പോഴൊക്കെ എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് അത് ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ആവുന്നത് എന്നുള്ളത് നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടുത്തെ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ വെച്ചിട്ട്, നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടുത്തെ മനുഷ്യരുടെ ഭൂവിനിയോഗത്തിൻ്റെ, ലാൻഡ് യൂസിൻ്റെ ഒരു സ്വഭാവം വെച്ചിട്ട്, കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഹിസ്റ്ററി എല്ലാം വെച്ചിട്ട് അത് അത്രത്തോളം പ്രാക്ടിക്കലാണ് എന്നുള്ള ചോദ്യം പലതരത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഉയർന്ന് വരാറുമുണ്ട്. ഇക്കോളജിക്കൽ ആസ്പെക്റ്റിൽ എത്രത്തോളം ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ആണ് വെസ്റ്റേൺ ഗാർഡ്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന പ്രദേശം?
Like in the broader context of everything in the tropics is super important.
Okay.
Western Ghats is very important because it houses a certain richness of biodiversity. And as far as you have very well forested areas, these are like what comes in that ad. It is the lungs of the earth.
Yes.
So whatever happens elsewhere, this is where it's all getting cleaned up, right? Leaders are prepared to spend so much of money on sequestration, but what is sequestration? Is just absorbing the carbon from the atmosphere, from the air, or from the system. This is a very important function that forests have been playing for a long time. Western Ghats house some of the most magnificent forests. Forests, when I say forest, it's not only the trees, then it's the birds, it's all the animals and everything. Just during COVID, my wife and I had to drive from here to Bangalore twice or thrice for some personal work. One of the amazing things was how much of biodiversity rebounded, or at least the flora, or fauna, right? We saw animals that we had not seen for 20 years, saying that, okay, they are kind of coming back. Paksha, the pressure on those things is relentless, right? We go more and more into Wayanad, for example, and it's a fantastic example of land use change, like you mentioned, but it's also an example of a certain uniformity in the land use. And what is the uniformity? Resorts.
Okay.
So the number of resorts there, and that means certain things, what you do with the land. Yes, it can be argued it's friendlier than some other things, but yeah. It provides jobs. There are there are positives. It's not to kind of put the positives down. Paksha, it has lost a significant amount of the biodiversity. In fact, I was talking to a scientist who was saying that many, they talk in Earth, scientists talk in a different scale.
Okay.
Right? So they're saying that apparently the flora and fauna we get in the Western Ghats is very similar to the flora and fauna you get in Madagascar.
Okay.
Because there was a time when apparently these two land masses were the same. So the eastern face of Madagascar and the western face of something like that, whatever, the western face of the Western Ghats, which we see here, are very similar. So there are significant benefits to that, okay. From a very operational perspective, here and now, I'll say it is a carbon sink. Okay. Then another thing that we all can appreciate is that, okay, that's where a lot of rivers originate. So if you want the rivers to be healthy, the origin of the rivers should be healthy, right? For example, there is this Srirangam is name of a place. There is a Srirangam somewhere in the Western Ghats, where the Kaveri flows through, but it's essentially an island that is formed in the Kaveri. So there is one is in the Western Ghats, one is between Bangalore and Mysore. It's called Srirangapatna, and then one is near the ocean in Tiruchi. It's called Srirangam, but they're all conceptually the same thing. So the thing is, if we don't have that health of the rivers through and through their course, then it's going to have a significant impact on the other planetary boundary, which is fresh water. And if your rivers are not healthy, your freshwater sources get depleted. So it's all kind of connected in that sense. And one of the reasons why these boundaries are being put up and said that, hey, we want to maintain it here, is that if it crosses those boundaries, we are not very sure what will be the impact on the Holocene.
Okay.
Will we enter into a phase where the planet is much hotter? Lot of people seem to be thinking that. Will we enter into a phase where the planet is more inhospitable? People worry about that. So it is to maintain that relatively comfortable or relatively you are comfortable, yeah, you can live and focus your attention and energies on other things rather than the basic survival aspects. From that perspective, it is important. So given all of these things, coming back to Wayanad, so now you have waterfalls, we have a certain amount of rainfall that falls on Wayanad. Forests are not as dense as they used to be. Water runs off much faster. If water runs off faster, it hits the plains and where we are much faster. We lose most of it. The water goes into the ocean. That is one effect, right? There are so many other kind of effects which we can.
നമുക്കറിയാം സയൻറ്റിഫിക് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റീൻ്റെ അകത്ത് ഇതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് വലിയ പഠനങ്ങൾ നിരന്തരം നടന്നുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കും, കണ്ടിന്യൂസ് ആയിട്ട് നടക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അക്കാഡമിക് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ഇൻ്റർനാഷണലി തന്നെ ലോകം മുഴുവൻ ഇതിനെപ്പറ്റി അവെയറാണ്. പക്ഷേ ഈ രണ്ട് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയുമാണ് ശരിക്കും പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസിന് ഏറ്റവും പറ്റിയ ആളുകൾ. അവർ ചെയ്യേണ്ടതാണ് പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റീൻ്റെ അകത്തേക്ക് ഈ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് കൊണ്ടുവരികയും പോളിസി മേക്കിങ്ങിലേക്ക് നിർബന്ധിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യേണ്ട ഒരു റോളും കൂടെ യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ ഈ അക്കാഡമിക് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്കും സയൻറ്റിഫിക് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്കും ഉണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ അത് വേണ്ട രീതിയിൽ നടക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ?
Okay. That's a tough question. The second part about the academic community is the tougher question for me individually. So I will take the first part first. So the first part is the political leaders. I think we say a lot of things about political leadership and so on. The way I look at it is they are actually pretty disciplined people, because they have election, at least in large parts of the world, at an election once in 5 years, that disciplines them. They have to deliver on multiple angles. For example, when you say social sustainability and environmental sustainability, they'll have to deliver on those aspects, on the social aspects. If they don't, they're toast, because they have competition. So that political market is a very competitive market. If you're not there, somebody is there to do your job or to perform that function. And I think that's how it is going to enter. That is how it is going to enter political leadership. Is when people will hold them accountable, or people will hold their leadership accountable, and that is the place where things like COP is a very important mechanism, right? Say, okay, these are the platforms, this is how I can express it, and so on. Companies also have a big role to play, because companies can choose what are the political motives and political lines that I am going to support, right? So who am I going to support for their elections in terms of my endowments and in terms of my donations and all of that. So business plays obviously an important role in those kinds of decisions. And ultimately it will come from that. It will come from people wanting something, and then the people higher up saying, okay, we are going to address that. And I think that right now we don't really have, do we have a Green Party in India? No. So I may be wrong, or I may be just too naive, but it might even be an opportunity. If not a Green Party, but somebody to incorporate green aspirations in their political messaging and in their political stance. It might be an opportunity. The second tougher question in academia, okay? Now this is really tough, so if I say something risky, what I think is that, see, every academician, right, from where I am sitting, so we do one or two simple things. We teach, we do research, we also do some outreach activities, and some of us participate in administration of our institute. IMK at least is largely we run the place. So with respect to teaching, the curriculum is normally well set. We have 1 year in our 2-year MBA program. We have 1 year of a core curriculum which everybody has to study, and there are ways of changing it, and there are curriculum reviews which happen through which we change it. We have courses on sustainability for the last 3 years, which we didn't have it before that.
Okay.
That went through a very systematic process. Some of the deans in our institute and some of the senior professors and many people, they work very hard to get all that done.
Okay.
Still, that will only move through a 5-year cycle. Then what moves through a 1-year cycle is what happens in the second year, which is the elective curriculum. So in the elective curriculum, you can pretty much offer any course you want, as far as you can defend it academically. So the academic community is easy, or I'm not saying it's easy, it's tough, but you have to kind of convince them through logical arguments. But once you convince somebody through logical arguments, you probably have a good chance. And that keeps happening. We have something like 125 electives which run. So it is a large amount of stuff there. That is all the teaching side. What's coming up on the research side is that we have 100% freedom to do research on whatever you want to do research on, right? As far as you write papers and publish and do those kinds of things, nobody, or sometimes they do, but not for the most part. There's a lot of freedom there. Then again, the third thing that I was talking about, administration. Those of us who get into administration, you can do all the current roles. I'm currently the Students Affairs Chairperson. But then if you feel that there's a need for us to have something new as an organization, you can develop that as well. So we've set up something in the last 2-3 years which is called Center for Climate Studies. So our freedom in Paksha, there is a language to talk, and that language is couched in academia, and you have to kind of make all the references. And if you talk about climate change and don't talk about Rockstorm 2009 and planetary boundaries, people won't take you seriously. But as far as you have read it and know what is there in it, so that is at my level. Now at a higher level, let's say at the leadership of the institute, at that level, I think it's much more challenging, obviously, because how much of money they want to kind of fund various activities is a choice that they have to make. The kinds of incentives they will give for doing research in various domains. As of now, they don't discriminate. You work on gender studies, or you work on financial markets, or you work on intellectual property, everything is the same for us. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because you never know where ideas come from, and if you put a lid on it there, you don't know what's going to happen later on. So yeah, I said about leadership, but I have nothing much to say because I have no idea. Sorry.
ഒറ്റ കാര്യം കൂടെ, ലാസ്റ്റ് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ. മീഡിയയുടെ റോൾ എന്താണ് എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, നമ്മൾ നേരത്തെ എൻവയോൺമെൻറ്റിനെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ധാരാളം സംസാരിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നിരുന്ന ഒരു സംഗതിയായിരുന്നു മീഡിയ. പക്ഷേ COP-28 പോലും എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഇവിടുത്തെ മീഡിയ കൈകാര്യം ചെയ്ത് റിപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്തതെന്ന് നോക്കിക്കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അതിന് കൊടുക്കുന്ന ഒരു ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസ് നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവും.
I think there are two things. One is it is a long, it's not a 100-meter sprint, it is a marathon. It's probably a ultra marathon. So I think there needs to be a lot of staying power in various media houses or outlets to stick with those topics and then see how they are evolving and how they are developing and so on. So for example, if L&D is 700 million, is it really such a big rise from what it was earlier, or is it the same, or is it actually decrease? Adokku parayano. Critical thinking needs to come in. And I think the media has got probably the best position to also communicate this to a younger population.
Yes.
Which I think is not satisfied with what they read through their formal mechanisms. I personally don't think that they can be satisfied. There is still a lot of current material which probably hasn't made its way into their textbooks in schools and colleges yet. So avadiyum, I think media plays a very, very important role. I've seen, because I follow all the sports pages, I know that there's a sports specialist who's sitting in all the newspapers and that team. But Anganatpol, I haven't seen a climate expert. ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ റാം പറഞ്ഞാൽ everybody knows, okay, Ram is ഹിന്ദുവിലെ ഒരാള്. Then ഗുഹ പറഞ്ഞാൽ we know that, okay, he talks about cricket. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു സ്പെഷ്യലിസ്റ്റ് ആൾക്കാരുണ്ട്, but you know, it needs
പോപ്പുലർ അല്ല.
It's not popular. I think there needs to be a lot more. I think a lot of information has to also be disseminated, right? So, for example, if you want to know about segregating waste, we need to show our people that how it's done in the parts of the world that we would like to be like, right? Normally, Japan, we would like to be like that. I think those kinds of references is something that the media can do very well. There seems to be almost a kind of tiredness with this climate thing, because people say, long term, you have to spend now for some unknown harm from, you have to spend now to ensure some unknown harm is prevented. That's a very, very difficult thing to sell to people, right? But I think it's important to kind of make that bridge that gap between the academic or the research community and what is being carried out as political, policy and so on. Sometimes I feel maybe we are not doing enough. Like I told you, right, I went to Chennai, and the air quality there was abysmal. I used to think only Delhi has bad air quality. Or I don't know, I mean, that AQI numbers of Delhi is 8 times worse than Calicut, same country, right? So what's going on there? We should understand those things slightly better. And I think in December it gets worse because of all the stubble burning that happens in some part, and then the wind or it carries it inside the thing. And these things have to end. Some topics need to enter common parlance, and it has to enter common conversations.
Yes.
And our role, I don't think academia can do it. I don't think only media can do it by kind of talking about it in a very creative manner, which I think you guys have the skills for. So.